Chapter 48 of The Man in the Iron Mask. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 48 The Grotto. In spite of the sort of divination which was the remarkable side of the character of Aramis, the event, subject to the risks of things over which uncertainty presides, did not fall out exactly as the bishop of Vannes had foreseen. Biscarrat, better mounted than his companions, arrived first at the opening of the grotto, and comprehended that fox and hounds were one and all engulfed in it. Only, struck by that superstitious terror which every dark and subterraneous way naturally impresses upon the mind of man, he stopped at the outside of the grotto, and waited till his companions should have assembled round him. "Well," asked the young men, coming up out of breath, and unable to understand the meaning of this inaction. "Well, I cannot hear the dogs. They and the fox must all be lost in this infernal cavern." "They were too close up," said one of the guards, "to have lost scent all at once. Besides, we should hear them from one side or another. They must, as Biscarrat say, be in this grotto." "But then," said one of the young men, "why don't they give tongue?" "It is strange," muttered another. "Well, but," said a fourth, "let us go into this grotto." "Does it happen to be forbidden we should enter it?" "No," replied Biscarrat. "Only, as it looks as dark as a wolf's mouth, we might break our necks in it." "Witness the dogs," said a guard, "who seem to have broken theirs." "What the devil can have become of them?" asked the young men in chorus; and every master called his dog by his name, whistled to him in his favorite mode, without a single one replying to either call or whistle. "It is perhaps an enchanted grotto," said Biscarrat. "Let us see." And jumping from his horse, he made a step into the grotto. "Stop, stop, I will accompany you," said one of the guards, on seeing Biscarrat disappear in the shades of the cavern's mouth. "No," replied Biscarrat, "there must be something extraordinary in the place. Don't let us risk ourselves all at once. If in 10 minutes you do not hear of me, you can come in, but not all at once." "Be it so," said the young man, who, besides, did not imagine that Biscarrat ran much risk in the enterprise. "We will wait for you." And without dismounting from their horses, they formed a circle round the grotto. Biscarrat entered then alone, and advanced through the darkness till he came in contact with the muzzle of Porthos's musket. The resistance which his chest met with astonished him. He naturally raised his hand and laid hold of the icy barrel. At the same instant, Yves lifted a knife against the young man, who was about to fall upon him with all the force of a Breton's arm, when the iron wrist of Porthos stopped it halfway. Then, like low muttering thunder, his voice growled in the darkness, "I will not have him killed." Biscarrat found himself between a protection and a threat, the one almost as terrible as the other. However brave the young man might be, he could not prevent a cry escaping him, which Aramis immediately suppressed by placing a handkerchief over his mouth. "Monsieur de Biscarrat," said he, in a low voice, "we mean you no harm, and you must know that if you have recognized us, but at the first word, the first groan, the first whisper, we shall be forced to kill you as we have killed your dogs." "Yes, I recognize you, gentlemen," said the officer in a low voice. "But why are you here? What are you doing here? Unfortunate men, I thought you were in the fort." "And you, monsieur, you were to obtain conditions for us, I think." "I did all I was able, messieurs, but—" "But what?" "But there are positive orders." "To kill us?" Biscarrat made no reply. It would have cost him too much to speak of the cord to gentlemen. Aramis understood the silence of the prisoner. "Monsieur Biscarrat," said he, You would be already dead if we had not regard for your youth and our ancient association with your father. But you may yet escape from the place by swearing that you will not tell your companions what you have seen." "I will not only swear that I will not speak of it," said Biscarrat, "but I still further swear that I will do everything in the world to prevent my companions from setting foot in the grotto." "Biscarrat! Biscarrat!" cried several voices from the outside, coming like a whirlwind into the cave. "Reply," said Aramis. "Here I am!" cried Biscarrat. "Now begone, we depend on your loyalty." And he left his hold of the young man, who hastily returned towards the light. "Biscarrat! Biscarrat!" cried the voices, still nearer, and the shadows of several human forms projected into the interior of the grotto. Biscarrat rushed to meet his friends in order to stop them, and met them just as they were adventuring into the cave. Aramis and Porthos listened with the intense attention of men whose life depends upon a breath of air. "Oh, oh!" exclaimed one of the guards, as he came to the light, "how pale you are!" "Pale!" cried another. "You ought to say corpse color." "I!" said the young man, endeavoring to collect his faculties. "In the name of Heaven, what has happened?" exclaimed all the voices. "You have not a drop of blood in your veins, my poor friend," said one of them, laughing. "Messieurs, it is nothing." "Messieurs, it is serious," said another. "He is going to faint. Does any one of you happen to have any salts?" And they all laughed. This hail of jests fell round Biscarrat's ears like musket balls in a melee. He recovered himself amidst a deluge of interrogations. "What do you suppose I have seen?" asked he. "I was too hot when I entered the grotto, and I have been struck with a chill. That is all." "But the dogs, the dogs, have you seen them again? Did you see anything of them? Do you know anything about them?" "I suppose they have got out some other way." "Messieurs," said one of the young men, "there is in that which is going on, in the paleness and silence of our friend, a mystery which Biscarrat will not or cannot reveal. Only, and this is certain, Biscarrat has seen something in the grotto. Well, for my part, I am very curious to see what it is, even if it is the devil. To the grotto, monsieur, to the grotto!" "To the grotto!" repeated all the voices. And the echo of the cavern carried like a menace to Porthos and Aramis, "To the grotto! To the grotto!" Biscarrat threw himself before his companions. "Messieurs, messieurs!" cried he, "in the name of Heaven, do not go in!" "Why, what is there so terrific in the cavern?" asked several at once. "Come, speak, Biscarrat." "Decidedly, it is the devil he has seen," repeated he who had before advanced that hypothesis. "Well," said another, "if he has seen him, he need not be selfish; he may as well let us have a look at him in turn." "Messieurs, messieurs, I beseech you," urged Biscarrat. "Nonsense! Let us pass." "Messieurs, I implore you not to enter." "Why? You went in yourself." Then one of the officers, who, of a riper age than the others, had till this time remained behind, and had said nothing, advanced. "Messieurs," said he, with a calmness which contrasted with the animation of the young men, "there is in there some person, or something, that is not the devil, but which, whatever it may be, has had sufficient power to silence our dogs. We must discover who this someone is, or what this something is." Biscarrat made a last effort to stop his friends, but it was useless. In vain he threw himself before the rashest, in vain he clung to the rocks to bar the passage. The crowd of young men rushed into the cave, in the steps of the officer who had spoken last, but who had sprung in first, sword in hand, to face the unknown danger. Biscarrat, repulsed by his friends, unable to accompany them, without passing in the eyes of Porthos and Aramis for a traitor and a perjurer, with painfully attentive ear and unconsciously supplicating hands, leaned against the rough side of a rock which he thought must be exposed to the fire of the musketeers. As to the guards, they penetrated further and further, with exclamations that grew fainter as they advanced. All at once, a discharge of musketry, growling like thunder, exploded in the entrails of the vault. 2 or 3 balls were flattened against the rock on which Biscarrat was leaning. At the same instant, cries, shrieks, imprecations burst forth, and the little troop of gentlemen reappeared, some pale, some bleeding, all enveloped in a cloud of smoke, which the outer air seemed to suck from the depths of the cavern. "Biscarrat! Biscarrat!" cried the fugitives. "You knew there was an ambuscade in that cavern, and you did not warn us! Biscarrat, you are the cause that 4 of us are murdered men! Woe be to you, Biscarrat!" "You are the cause of my being wounded unto death," said one of the young men, letting a gush of scarlet lifeblood vomit in his palm, and spattering into Biscarrat's livid face. "My blood be on your head!" And he rolled in agony at the feet of the young man. "But at least tell us who is there!" cried several furious voices. Biscarrat remained silent. "Tell us or die!" cried the wounded man, raising himself upon one knee, and lifting towards his companion an arm bearing a useless sword. Biscarrat rushed towards him, opening his breast for the blow, but the wounded man fell back not to rise again, uttering a groan which was his last. Biscarrat, with hair on end, haggard eyes, and bewildered head, advanced towards the interior of the cavern, saying, "You are right. Death to me, who have allowed my comrades to be assassinated. I am a worthless wretch." And throwing away his sword, for he wished to die without defending himself, he rushed head foremost into the cavern. The others followed him. The 11 who remained out of 16 imitated his example, but they did not go further than the first. A second discharge laid 5 upon the icy sand, and as it was impossible to see whence this murderous thunder issued, the others fell back with a terror that can be better imagined than described. But far from flying, as the others had done, Biscarrat remained safe and sound, seated on a fragment of rock, and waited. There were only 6 gentlemen left. "Seriously," said one of the survivors, "is it the devil?" "Ma foi, it is much worse," said another. "Ask Biscarrat, he knows." "Where is Biscarrat?" The young men looked round them, and saw that Biscarrat did not answer. "He is dead," said 2 or 3 voices. "Oh, no," replied another. "I saw him through the smoke, sitting quietly on a rock. He is in the cavern. He is waiting for us." "He must know who are there." "And how should he know them?" "He was taken prisoner by the rebels." "That is true. Well, let us call him and learn from him whom we have to deal with." And all voices shouted, "Biscarrat! Biscarrat!" But Biscarrat did not answer. "Good," said the officer who had shown so much coolness in the affair. "We have no longer any need of him. Here are reinforcements coming." In fact, a company of guards, left in the rear by their officers, whom the ardor of the chase had carried away, from 75 to 80 men, arrived in good order, led by their captain and the first lieutenant. The 5 officers hastened to meet their soldiers, and, in language the eloquence of which may be easily imagined, they related the adventure and asked for aid. The captain interrupted them. "Where are your companions?" demanded he. "Dead." "But there were 16 of you." "10 are dead. Biscarrat's in the cavern, and we are 5." "Biscarrat is a prisoner?" "Probably." "No, for here he is, look." In fact, Biscarrat appeared at the opening of the grotto. "He is making a sign to come on," said the officer. "Come on." Come on!" cried all the troop, and they advanced to meet Biscarrat. "Monsieur," said the captain, addressing Biscarrat, "I am assured that you know who the men are in that grotto, and who make such a desperate defense. In the king's name, I command you to declare what you know." "Captain," said Biscarrat, "you have no need to command me. My word has been restored to me this very instant, and I came in the name of these men." "To tell me who they are?" "To tell you they are determined to defend themselves to the death, unless you grant them satisfactory terms." "How many are there of them, then?" "There are two," said Biscarrat. "There are two, and want to impose conditions upon us?" "There are two, and they have already killed 10 of our men." "What sort of people are they? Giants?" "Worse than that. Do you remember the history of the Bastion Saint Gervais, captain?" "Yes, where 4 musketeers held out against an army." "Well, these are 2 of those same musketeers." "And their names?" "At that period, they were called Porthos and Aramis. Now they are styled Monsieur d'Herblay and Monsieur du Vallon." "And what interest have they in all this?" "It is they who were holding Belle Isle for Monsieur Fouquet." A murmur ran through the ranks of the soldiers on hearing the 2 words, Porthos and Aramis. "The musketeers! The musketeers!" repeated they. And among all these brave men, the idea that they were going to have a struggle against 2 of the oldest glories of the French army, made a shiver, half enthusiasm, 2/3 terror, run through them. In fact, those 4 names, D'Artagnan, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, were venerated among all who wore a sword, as, in antiquity, the names of Hercules, Theseus, Castor, and Pollux were venerated. "2 men, and they have killed 10 in 2 discharges. It is impossible, Monsieur Biscarrat." "Eh, captain," replied the latter, "I do not tell you that they have not with them 2 or 3 men, as the musketeers of the Bastion Saint Gervais had 2 or 3 lackeys; but believe me, captain, I have seen these men, I have been taken prisoner by them, I know they themselves alone are all sufficient to destroy an army." "That we shall see," said the captain, "and that in a moment, too. Gentlemen, attention." At this reply, no one stirred, and all prepared to obey. Biscarrat alone risked a last attempt. "Monsieur," said he, in a low voice, "be persuaded by me. Let us pass on our way. Those 2 men, those 2 lions you are going to attack, will defend themselves to the death. They have already killed 10 of our men. They will kill double the number, and end by killing themselves rather than surrender. What shall we gain by fighting them?" "We shall gain the consciousness, monsieur, of not having allowed 80 of the king's guards to retire before 2 rebels. If I listened to your advice, monsieur, I should be a dishonored man, and by dishonoring myself I should dishonor the army. Forward, my men!" And he marched first as far as the opening of the grotto. There he halted. The object of this halt was to give Biscarrat and his companions time to describe to him the interior of the grotto. Then, when he believed he had a sufficient acquaintance with the place, he divided his company into 3 bodies, which were to enter successively, keeping up a sustained fire in all directions. No doubt, in this attack they would lose 5 more, perhaps 10, but certainly they must end by taking the rebels, since there was no issue, and at any rate 2 men could not kill 80. "Captain," said Biscarrat, "I beg to be allowed to march at the head of the first platoon." "So be it," replied the captain. "You have all the honor. I make you a present of it." "Thanks," replied the young man, with all the firmness of his race. "Take your sword, then." "I shall go as I am, captain," said Biscarrat. For I do not go to kill, I go to be killed." And placing himself at the head of the first platoon, with head uncovered and arms crossed, "March, gentlemen," said he. End of chapter. Chapter 49 of The Man in the Iron Mask. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 49. An Homeric Song. It is time to pass to the other camp, and to describe at once the combatants and the field of battle. Aramis and Porthos had gone to the grotto of Locmaria with the expectation of finding there their canoe, ready armed, as well as the three Bretons, their assistants; and they at first hoped to make the bark pass through the little issue of the cavern, concealing in that fashion both their labors and their flight. The arrival of the fox and dogs obliged them to remain concealed. The grotto extended the space of about 100 toises, to that little slope dominating a creek. Formerly a temple of the Celtic divinities, when Belle Isle was still called Calais, this grotto had beheld more than one human sacrifice accomplished in its mystic depths. The first entrance to the cavern was by a moderate descent, above which distorted rocks formed a weird arcade. The interior, very uneven and dangerous from the inequalities of the vault, was subdivided into several compartments, which communicated with each other by means of rough and jagged steps, fixed right and left, in uncouth natural pillars. At the third compartment the vault was so low, the passage so narrow, that the bark would scarcely have passed without touching the side. Nevertheless, in moments of despair, wood softens, and stone grows flexible beneath the human will. Such was the thought of Aramis, when, after having fought the fight, he decided upon flight, a flight most dangerous, since all the assailants were not dead, and that, admitting the possibility of putting the bark to sea, they would have to fly in open day, before the conquered, so interested on recognizing their small number, in pursuing their conquerors. When the 2 discharges had killed 10 men, Aramis, familiar with the windings of the cavern, went to reconnoiter them one by one, and counted them, for the smoke prevented seeing outside, and he immediately commanded that the canoe should be rolled as far as the great stone, the closure of the liberating issue. Porthos collected all his strength, took the canoe in his arms, and raised it up, whilst the Bretons made it run rapidly along the rollers. They had descended into the third compartment, they had arrived at the stone which walled the outlet. Porthos seized this gigantic stone at its base, applied his robust shoulder, and gave a heave which made the wall crack. A cloud of dust fell from the vault, with the ashes of 10,000 generations of sea birds, whose nests stuck like cement to the rock. At the third shock, the stone gave way and oscillated for a minute. Porthos, placing his back against the neighboring rock, made an arch with his foot, which drove the block out of the calcareous masses which served for hinges and cramps. The stone fell, and daylight was visible, brilliant, radiant, flooding the cavern through the opening, and the blue sea appeared to the delighted Bretons. They began to lift the bark over the barricade. 20 more toises, and it would glide into the ocean. It was during this time that the company arrived, was drawn up by the captain, and disposed for either an escalade or an assault. Aramis watched over everything, to favor the labors of his friends. He saw the reinforcements, counted the men, and convinced himself at a single glance of the insurmountable peril to which fresh combat would expose them. To escape by sea, at the moment the cavern was about to be invaded, was impossible. In fact, the daylight which had just been admitted to the last compartments had exposed to the soldiers the bark being rolled towards the sea, the 2 rebels within musket shot, and one of their discharges would riddle the boat if it did not kill the navigators. Besides, allowing everything, if the bark escaped with the men on board of it, How could the alarm be suppressed? How could notice to the royal lighters be prevented? What could hinder the poor canoe, followed by sea and watched from the shore, from succumbing before the end of the day? Aramis, digging his hands into his gray hair with rage, invoked the assistance of God and the assistance of the demons. Calling to Porthos, who was doing more work than all the rollers, whether of flesh or wood, "My friend," said he, "our adversaries have just received a reinforcement." "Ah! ah!" said Porthos, quietly. "What is to be done, then?" "To recommence the combat," said Aramis, "is hazardous." "Yes," said Porthos, "for it is difficult to suppose that out of two one should not be killed, and certainly, if one of us was killed, the other would get himself killed also." Porthos spoke these words with that heroic nature which, with him, grew grander with necessity. Aramis felt it like a spur to his heart. "We shall neither of us be killed if you do what I tell you, friend Porthos." "Tell me what?" "These people are coming down into the grotto." "Yes." "We could kill about 15 of them, but no more." "How many are there in all?" asked Porthos. "They have received a reinforcement of 75 men." "75 and 5, 80. Ah!" sighed Porthos. "If they fire all at once, they will riddle us with balls." "Certainly they will." "Without reckoning," added Aramis, "that the detonation might occasion a collapse of the cavern." "Ay," said Porthos, "a piece of falling rock just now grazed my shoulder." "You see, then." "Oh, it is nothing." "We must determine upon something quickly. Our Bretons are going to continue to roll the canoe towards the sea." "Very well." "We two will keep the powder, the balls, and the muskets here." "But only two, my dear Aramis. We shall never fire 3 shots together," said Porthos, innocently. "The defense by musketry is a bad one." "Find a better, then." "I have found one," said the giant, eagerly. "I will place myself in ambuscade behind the pillar with this iron bar, and invisible, unattackable, if they come in floods, I can let my bar fall upon their skulls 30 times in a minute. Hein, what do you think of the project? You smile." "Excellent, dear friend, perfect. I approve it greatly. Only you will frighten them, and half of them will remain outside to take us by famine. What we want, my good friend, is the entire destruction of the troop. A single survivor encompasses our ruin." "You are right, my friend; but how can we attract them, pray?" "By not stirring, my good Porthos." "Well, we won't stir, then; but when they are all together—" "Then leave it to me. I have an idea." "If it is so, and your idea proves a good one, and your idea is most likely to be good, I am satisfied." "To your ambuscade, Porthos, and count how many enter." "But you, what will you do?" "Don't trouble yourself about me. I have a task to perform." "I think I hear shouts." "It is they. To your post. Keep within reach of my voice and hand." Porthos took refuge in the second compartment, which was in darkness, absolutely black. Aramis glided into the third. The giant held in his hand an iron bar of about 50 pounds weight. Porthos handled this lever, which had been used in rolling the bark, with marvelous facility. During this time, the Bretons had pushed the bark to the beach. In the further and lighter compartment, Aramis, stooping and concealed, was busy with some mysterious maneuver. A command was given in a loud voice. It was the last order of the captain commandant. 25 men jumped from the upper rocks into the first compartment of the grotto, and having taken their ground, began to fire. The echoes shrieked and barked. The hissing balls seemed actually to rarefy the air, and then opaque smoke filled the vault. "To the left! To the left!" cried Biscarrat, who in his first assault had seen the passage to the second chamber, and who, animated by the smell of powder, wished to guide his soldiers in that direction. The troop, accordingly, precipitated themselves to the left, the passage gradually growing narrower. Biscarrat, with his hands stretched forward, devoted to death, marched in advance of the muskets. "Come on! Come on!" exclaimed he. "I see daylight." "Strike, Porthos!" came the sepulchral voice of Aramis. Porthos breathed a heavy sigh, but he obeyed. The iron bar fell full and direct upon the head of Biscarrat, who was dead before he had ended his cry. Then the formidable lever rose 10 times in 10 seconds, and made 10 corpses. The soldiers could see nothing. They heard sighs and groans. They stumbled over dead bodies, but as they had no conception of the cause of all this, they came forward, jostling each other. The implacable bar, still falling, annihilated the first platoon, without a single sound to warn the second, which was quietly advancing. Only, commanded by the captain, the men had stripped a fir growing on the shore, and with its resinous branches twisted together, the captain had made a flambeau. On arriving at the compartment where Porthos, like the exterminating angel, had destroyed all he touched, the first rank drew back in terror. No firing had replied to that of the guards, and yet their way was stopped by a heap of dead bodies. They literally walked in blood. Porthos was still behind his pillar. The captain, illumining with trembling pine torch this frightful carnage, of which he in vain sought the cause, drew back towards the pillar behind which Porthos was concealed. Then a gigantic hand issued from the shade and fastened on the throat of the captain, who uttered a stifled rattle, his stretched out arms beating the air. The torch fell and was extinguished in blood. A second after, the corpse of the captain dropped close to the extinguished torch, and added another body to the heap of dead which blocked up the passage. All this was effected as mysteriously as though by magic. At hearing the rattling in the throat of the captain, the soldiers who accompanied him had turned round, caught a glimpse of his extended arms, his eyes starting from their sockets, and then the torch fell, and they were left in darkness. From an unreflective, instinctive, mechanical feeling, the lieutenant cried, "Fire!" Immediately a volley of musketry flamed, thundered, roared in the cavern, bringing down enormous fragments from the vaults. The cavern was lighted for an instant by this discharge, and then immediately returned to pitchy darkness, rendered thicker by the smoke. To this succeeded a profound silence, broken only by the steps of the third brigade, now entering the cavern. End of chapter. Chapter 50 of The Man in the Iron Mask. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 50 The Death of a Titan. At the moment when Porthos, more accustomed to the darkness than these men coming from open daylight, was looking round him to see if through this artificial midnight Aramis were not making him some signal, he felt his arm gently touched, and a voice low as a breath murmured in his ear, "Come." "Oh!" said Porthos. "Hush!" said Aramis, if possible, yet more softly. And amidst the noise of the third brigade, which continued to advance, the imprecations of the guards still left alive, the muffled groans of the dying, Aramis and Porthos glided unseen along the granite walls of the cavern. Aramis led Porthos into the last but one compartment, and showed him, in a hollow of the rocky wall, a barrel of powder weighing from 70 to 80 pounds, to which he had just attached a fuse. "My friend," said he to Porthos, "you will take this barrel, the match of which I am going to set fire to, and throw it amidst our enemies. Can you do so?" "Parbleu!" replied Porthos, and he lifted the barrel with one hand. "Light it." "Stop," said Aramis, "till they are all massed together, and then, my Jupiter, hurl your thunderbolt among them." "Light it!" repeated Porthos. "On my part," continued Aramis, "I will join our Bretons, and help them to get the canoe to the sea. I will wait for you on the shore, launch it strongly, and hasten to us." "Light it!" said Porthos a third time. "But do you understand me?" "Parbleu!" said Porthos again, with laughter that he did not even attempt to restrain. "When a thing is explained to me, I understand it. Begone, and give me the light." Aramis gave the burning match to Porthos, who held out his arm to him, his hands being engaged. Aramis pressed the arm of Porthos with both his hands, and fell back to the outlet of the cavern, where the three rowers awaited him. Porthos, left alone, applied the spark bravely to the match. The spark, a feeble spark, first principle of conflagration, shone in the darkness like a glowworm, then was deadened against the match which it set fire to, Porthos enlivening the flame with his breath. The smoke was a little dispersed, and by the light of the sparkling match objects might, for 2 seconds, be distinguished. It was a brief but splendid spectacle, that of this giant, pale, bloody, his countenance lighted by the fire of the match burning in surrounding darkness. The soldiers saw him. They saw the barrel he held in his hand. They at once understood what was going to happen. Then these men, already choked with horror at the sight of what had been accomplished, filled with terror at the thought of what was about to be accomplished, gave out a simultaneous shriek of agony. Some endeavored to fly, but they encountered the third brigade, which barred their passage. Others mechanically took aim and attempted to fire their discharged muskets. Others fell instinctively upon their knees. 2 or 3 officers cried out to Porthos to promise him his liberty if he would spare their lives. The lieutenant of the third brigade commanded his men to fire, but the guards had before them their terrified companions, who served as a living rampart for Porthos. We have said that the light produced by the spark and the match did not last more than 2 seconds, but during these 2 seconds that is what it illumined. In the first place, the giant, enlarged in the darkness; then, at 10 paces off, a heap of bleeding bodies, crushed, mutilated, in the midst of which some still heaved in the last agony, lifting the mass as a last respiration, inflating the sides of some old monster dying in the night. Every breath of Porthos, thus vivifying the match, sent towards this heap of bodies a phosphorescent aura, mingled with streaks of purple. In addition to this principal group scattered about the grotto, as the chances of death or surprise had stretched them, isolated bodies seemed to be making ghastly exhibitions of their gaping wounds. Above ground, bedded in pools of blood, rose, heavy and sparkling, the short, thick pillars of the cavern, of which the strongly marked shades threw out the luminous particles. And all this was seen by the tremulous light of a match attached to a barrel of powder; that is to say, a torch which, whilst throwing a light on the dead past, showed death to come. As I have said, this spectacle did not last above 2 seconds. During this short space of time, an officer of the third brigade got together 8 men armed with muskets, and, through an opening, ordered them to fire upon Porthos. But they who received the order to fire trembled so that 3 guards fell by the discharge, and the 5 remaining balls hissed on to splinter the vault, plough the ground, or indent the pillars of the cavern. A burst of laughter replied to this volley, then the arm of the giant swung round, then was seen whirling through the air, like a falling star, the train of fire. The barrel, hurled a distance of 30 feet, cleared the barricade of dead bodies, and fell amidst a group of shrieking soldiers, who threw themselves on their faces. The officer had followed the brilliant train in the air; he endeavored to precipitate himself upon the barrel and tear out the match before it reached the powder it contained. Useless. The air had made the flame attached to the conductor more active. The match, which at rest might have burnt 5 minutes, was consumed in 30 seconds, and the infernal work exploded. Furious vortices of sulphur and nitre, devouring shoals of fire which caught every object, the terrible thunder of the explosion. This is what the second which followed disclosed in that cavern of horrors. The rocks split like planks of deal beneath the axe. A jet of fire, smoke, and debris sprang from the middle of the grotto, enlarging as it mounted. The large walls of silex tottered and fell upon the sand, and the sand itself, an instrument of pain when launched from its hard bed, riddled the faces with its myriad cutting atoms. Shrieks, imprecations, human life, dead bodies, all were engulfed in one terrific crash. The first three compartments became one sepulchral sink into which fell grimly back, in the order of their weight, every vegetable, mineral, or human fragment. Then the lighter sand and ash came down in turn, stretching like a winding sheet, and smoking over the dismal scene. And now, in this burning tomb, this subterranean volcano, seek the king's guards with their blue coats laced with silver. Seek the officers, brilliant in gold. Seek for the arms upon which they depended for their defense. One single man has made of all these things a chaos more confused, more shapeless, more terrible, than the chaos which existed before the creation of the world. There remained nothing of the three compartments, nothing by which God could have recognized his handiwork. As for Porthos, after having hurled the barrel of powder amidst his enemies, he had fled, as Aramis had directed him to do, and had gained the last compartment, into which air, light, and sunshine penetrated through the opening. Scarcely had he turned the angle which separated the third compartment from the fourth, when he perceived at 100 paces from him the bark dancing on the waves. There were his friends, their liberty, their life and victory. 6 more of his formidable strides, and he would be out of the vault, out of the vault. A dozen of his vigorous leaps, and he would reach the canoe. Suddenly, he felt his knees give way. His knees seemed powerless, his legs to yield beneath him. "Oh, oh!" murmured he, "there is my weakness seizing me again. I can walk no further. What is this?" Aramis perceived him through the opening, and unable to conceive what could induce him to stop thus. "Come on, Porthos, come on!" he cried. "Come quickly!" "Oh!" replied the giant, making an effort that contorted every muscle of his body. "Oh, but I cannot!" While saying these words he fell upon his knees, but with his mighty hands he clung to the rocks and raised himself up again. "Quick, quick!" repeated Aramis, bending forward towards the shore, as if to draw Porthos towards him with his arms. "Here I am!" staggered Porthos, collecting all his strength to make one step more. "In the name of Heaven! Porthos, make haste! The barrel will blow up!" "Make haste, monseigneur!" shouted the Bretons to Porthos, who was floundering as in a dream. But there was no time. The explosion thundered, earth gaped, the smoke which hurled through the clefts obscured the sky, the sea flowed back as though driven by the blast of flame which darted from the grotto, as if from the jaws of some gigantic fiery chimera. The reflux took the bark out 20 toises. The solid rocks cracked to their base, and separated like blocks beneath the operation of the wedge. A portion of the vault was carried up towards heaven, as if it had been built of cardboard. The green and blue and topaz conflagration and black lava of liquefactions clashed and combated an instant beneath a majestic dome of smoke, then oscillated, declined, and fell successively the mighty monoliths of rock which the violence of the explosion had not been able to uproot from the bed of ages. They bowed to each other like grave and stiff old men, then, prostrating themselves, lay down forever in their dusty tomb. This frightful shock seemed to restore Porthos the strength that he had lost. He arose, a giant among granite giants. But at the moment he was flying between the double hedge of granite phantoms, these latter, which were no longer supported by the corresponding links, began to roll and totter round our Titan, who looked as if precipitated from heaven amidst rocks which he had just been launching. Porthos felt the very earth beneath his feet becoming jelly tremulous. He stretched both hands to repulse the falling rocks. A gigantic block was held back by each of his extended arms. He bent his head, and a third granite mass sank between his shoulders. For an instant, the power of Porthos seemed about to fail him, but this new Hercules united all his force, and the two walls of the prison in which he was buried fell back slowly and gave him place. For an instant he appeared, in this frame of granite, like the angel of chaos, but in pushing back the lateral rocks, he lost his point of support, for the monolith which weighed upon his shoulders, and the boulder, pressing upon him with all its weight, brought the giant down upon his knees. The lateral rocks, for an instant pushed back, drew together again, and added their weight to the ponderous mass which would have been sufficient to crush 10 men. The hero fell without a groan. He fell while answering Aramis with words of encouragement and hope, for, thanks to the powerful arch of his hands, for an instant he believed that, like Enceladus, he would succeed in shaking off the triple load. But by degrees Aramis beheld the block sink. The hands, strung for an instant, the arms stiffened for a last effort, gave way, the extended shoulders sank, wounded and torn, and the rocks continued to gradually collapse. "Porthos! Porthos!" cried Aramis, tearing his hair. "Porthos, where are you? Speak!" "Here, here," murmured Porthos, with a voice growing evidently weaker. "Patience, patience." Scarcely had he pronounced these words when the impulse of the fall augmented the weight. The enormous rock sank down, pressed by those others which sank in from the sides, and, as it were, swallowed up Porthos in a sepulchre of badly jointed stones. On hearing the dying voice of his friend, Aramis had sprung to land. Two of the Bretons followed him, with each a lever in his hand, one being sufficient to take care of the bark. The dying rattle of the valiant gladiator guided them amidst the ruins. Aramis, animated, active, and young as at 20, sprang towards the triple mass, and with his hands, delicate as those of a woman, raised by a miracle of strength the cornerstone of this great granite grave. Then he caught a glimpse, through the darkness of that charnel house, of the still brilliant eye of his friend, to whom the momentary lifting of the mass restored a momentary respiration. The two men came rushing up, grasped their iron levers, united their triple strength, not merely to raise it, but sustain it. All was useless. They gave way with cries of grief, and the rough voice of Porthos, seeing them exhaust themselves in a useless struggle, murmured in an almost cheerful tone those supreme words which came to his lips with the last respiration: "Too heavy." After which his eyes darkened and closed. His face grew ashy pale, the hands whitened, and the colossus sank quite down, breathing his last sigh. With him sank the rock, which, even in his dying agony, he had still held up. The three men dropped the levers, which rolled upon the tumulary stone. Then, breathless, pale, his brow covered with sweat, Aramis listened, his breast oppressed, his heart ready to break. Nothing more. The giant slept the eternal sleep, in the sepulchre which God had built about him to his measure. End of chapter. Chapter 51 of The Man in the Iron Mask. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Man in the Iron Mask, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 51. Porthos' Epitaph. Aramis, silent and sad as ice, trembling like a timid child, arose shivering from the stone. A Christian does not walk on tombs. But, though capable of standing, he was not capable of walking. It might be said that something of dead Porthos had just died within him. His Bretons surrounded him. Aramis yielded to their kind exertions, and the three sailors, lifting him up, carried him to the canoe. Then, having laid him down upon the bench near the rudder, they took to their oars, preferring this to hoisting sail, which might betray them. On all that levelled surface of the ancient grotto of Locmaria, one single hillock attracted their eyes. Aramis never removed his from it, and at a distance out in the sea, in proportion as the shore receded, that menacing proud mass of rock seemed to draw itself up, as formerly Porthos used to draw himself up, raising a smiling yet invincible head towards heaven, like that of his dear old honest, valiant friend, the strongest of the four, yet the first dead. Strange destiny of these men of brass! The most simple of heart allied to the most crafty, strength of body guided by subtlety of mind, and in the decisive moment, when vigor alone could save mind and body, a stone, a rock, a vile material weight, triumphed over manly strength, and falling upon the body, drove out the mind. Worthy Porthos, born to help other men, always ready to sacrifice himself for the safety of the weak, as if God had only given him strength for that purpose. When dying, he only thought he was carrying out the conditions of his compact with Aramis, a compact, however, which Aramis alone had drawn up, and which Porthos had only known to suffer by its terrible solidarity. Noble Porthos! Of what good now are thy chateaux, overflowing with sumptuous furniture, forests overflowing with game, lakes overflowing with fish, cellars overflowing with wealth? Of what service to thee now thy lackeys in brilliant liveries, and in the midst of them Mousqueton, proud of the power delegated by thee? Oh, noble Porthos, careful heaper up of treasure, was it worth while to labor to sweeten and gild life, to come upon a desert shore, surrounded by the cries of sea gulls, and lay thyself, with broken bones, beneath the torpid stone? Was it worth while, in short, noble Porthos, to heap so much gold, and not have even the distich of a poor poet engraven upon thy monument? Valiant Porthos! He still, without doubt, sleeps, lost, forgotten, beneath the rock the shepherds of the heath take for the gigantic abode of a dolmen, and so many twining branches, so many mosses, bent by the bitter wind of ocean, so many lichens solder thy sepulchre to earth, that no passers-by will imagine such a block of granite could ever have been supported by the shoulders of one man. Aramis, still pale, still icy cold, his heart upon his lips, looked even till, with the last ray of daylight, the shore faded on the horizon. Not a word escaped him, not a sigh rose from his deep breast. The superstitious Bretons looked upon him trembling. Such silence was not that of a man, it was the silence of a statue. In the meantime, with the first gray lines that lighted up the heavens, the canoe hoisted its little sail, which, swelling with the kisses of the breeze, and carrying them rapidly from the coast, made bravest way towards Spain, across the dreaded Gulf of Gascony, so rife with storms. But scarcely half an hour after the sail had been hoisted, the rowers became inactive, reclining on their benches, and making an eye shade with their hands, pointed out to each other a white spot which appeared on the horizon as motionless as a gull rocked by the viewless respiration of the waves. But that which might have appeared motionless to ordinary eyes was moving at a quick rate to the experienced eye of the sailor. That which appeared stationary upon the ocean was cutting a rapid way through it. For some time, seeing the profound torpor in which their master was plunged, they did not dare to rouse him, and satisfied themselves with exchanging their conjectures in whispers. Aramis, in fact, so vigilant, so active, Aramis, whose eye, like that of the lynx, watched without ceasing, and saw better by night than by day, Aramis seemed to sleep in this despair of soul. An hour passed thus, during which daylight gradually disappeared, but during which also the sail in view gained so swiftly on the bark, that Goenne, one of the three sailors, ventured to say aloud, "Monseigneur, we are being chased." Aramis made no reply. The ship still gained upon them. Then, of their own accord, two of the sailors, by the direction of the patron Yves, lowered the sail, in order that that single point upon the surface of the waters should cease to be a guide to the eye of the enemy pursuing them. On the part of the ship in sight, on the contrary, two more small sails were run up at the extremities of the masts. Unfortunately, it was the time of the finest and longest days of the year, and the moon in all her brilliancy succeeded inauspicious daylight. The balancelle, which was pursuing the little bark before the wind, had then still half an hour of twilight, and a whole night almost as light as day. "Monseigneur, monseigneur, we are lost," said the captain. "Look, they see us plainly, though we have lowered sail." "That is not to be wondered at," murmured one of the sailors, "since they say that, by the aid of the devil, the Paris folk have fabricated instruments with which they see as well at a distance as near, by night as well as by day." Aramis took a telescope from the bottom of the boat, focused it silently, and passing it to the sailor, "Here," said he, "look." The sailor hesitated. "Don't be alarmed," said the bishop. "There is no sin in it, and if there is any sin, I will take it on myself." The sailor lifted the glass to his eye and uttered a cry. He believed that the vessel, which appeared to be distant about cannon shot, had at a single bound cleared the whole distance; but, on withdrawing the instrument from his eye, he saw that, except the way which the balancelle had been able to make during that brief instant, it was still at the same distance. "So," murmured the sailor, "they can see us as we see them." "They see us," said Aramis, and sank again into impassibility. "What! They see us?" said Yves. "Impossible." "Well, captain, look yourself," said the sailor, and he passed him the glass. "Monseigneur assures me that the devil has nothing to do with this?" asked Yves. Aramis shrugged his shoulders. The skipper lifted the glass to his eye. "Oh, monseigneur," said he, "it is a miracle! There they are. It seems as if I were going to touch them. 25 men at least. Ah! I see the captain forward. He holds a glass like this, and is looking at us. Ah! He turns round and gives an order. They are rolling a piece of cannon forward. They are loading it, pointing it. Misericorde, they are firing at us!" And by a mechanical movement, the skipper put aside the telescope, and the pursuing ship, relegated to the horizon, appeared again in its true aspect. The vessel was still at the distance of nearly a league, but the maneuver sighted thus was not less real. A light cloud of smoke appeared beneath the sails, more blue than they, and spreading like a flower opening. Then, at about a mile from the little canoe, they saw the ball take the crown off 2 or 3 waves, dig a white furrow in the sea, and disappear at the end of it, as inoffensive as the stone with which, in play, a boy makes ducks and drakes. It was at once a menace and a warning. "What is to be done?" asked the patron. "They will sink us," said Goenne. "Give us absolution, monseigneur." And the sailors fell on their knees before him. "You forget that they can see you," said he. "That is true," said the sailors, ashamed of their weakness. "Give us your orders, monseigneur. We are prepared to die for you." "Let us wait," said Aramis. "How? Let us wait." "Yes, do you not see? as you just now said, that if we endeavor to fly, they will sink us." "But perhaps," the patron ventured to say, "perhaps under cover of night we could escape them?" "Oh," said Aramis, "they have, no doubt, Greek fire with which to lighten their own course, and ours likewise." At the same moment, as if the vessel was responsive to the appeal of Aramis, a second cloud of smoke mounted slowly to the heavens, and from the bosom of that cloud sparkled an arrow of flame, which described a parabola like a rainbow, and fell into the sea, where it continued to burn, illuminating a space of a quarter of a league in diameter. The Bretons looked at each other in terror. "You see plainly," said Aramis, "it will be better to wait for them." The oars dropped from the hands of the sailors, and the bark, ceasing to make way, rocked motionless upon the summits of the waves. Night came on, but still the ship drew nearer. It might be imagined it redoubled its speed with darkness. From time to time, as a vulture rears his head out of its nest, the formidable Greek fire darted from its sides, and cast its flame upon the ocean like an incandescent snowfall. At last, it came within musket shot. All the men were on deck, arms in hand. The cannoneers were at their guns, the matches burning. It might be thought they were about to board a frigate and to fight a crew superior in number to their own, not to attempt the capture of a canoe manned by 4 people. "Surrender!" cried the commander of the Balancelle, with the aid of his speaking trumpet. The sailors looked at Aramis. Aramis made a sign with his head. Yves waved a white cloth at the end of a gaff. This was like striking their flag. The pursuer came on like a racehorse. It launched a fresh Greek fire, which fell within 20 paces of the little canoe, and threw a light upon them as white as sunshine. "At the first sign of resistance," cried the commander of the Balancelle, "fire!" The soldiers brought their muskets to the present. "Did we not say we surrendered?" said Yves. "Alive! alive, captain!" cried one excited soldier. "They must be taken alive!" "Well, yes, living," said the captain. Then, turning toward the Bretons, "Your lives are safe, my friends," cried he. "All but the Chevalier d'Herblay." Aramis stared imperceptibly. For an instant his eye was fixed upon the depths of the ocean, illumined by the last flashes of the Greek fire, which ran along the sides of the waves, played on the crests like plumes, and rendered still darker and more terrible the gulfs they covered. "Do you hear, monseigneur?" said the sailors. "Yes." "What are your orders?" "Accept." "But you, monseigneur?" Aramis leaned still more forward, and dipped the ends of his long white fingers in the green limpid waters of the sea, to which he turned with smiles, as to a friend. "Accept," repeated he. "We accept," repeated the sailors. "But what security have we?" "The word of a gentleman," said the officer. "By my rank and by my name, I swear that all except Monsieur de Chevalier d'Herblay shall have their lives spared. I am lieutenant of the king's frigate the Pomona, and my name is Louis Constant de Pressigny." With a rapid gesture, Aramis, already bent over the side of the bark towards the sea, drew himself up, and with a flashing eye and a smile upon his lips, "Throw out the ladder, messieurs," said he, as if the command had belonged to him. He was obeyed. When Aramis, seizing the rope ladder, walked straight up to the commander, with a firm step, looked at him earnestly, made a sign to him with his hand, a mysterious and unknown sign, at sight of which the officer turned pale, trembled, and bowed his head, the sailors were profoundly astonished. Without a word, Aramis then raised his hand to the eyes of the commander, and showed him the collet of a ring he wore on the ring finger of his left hand. And while making this sign, Aramis, draped in cold and haughty majesty, had the air of an emperor giving his hand to be kissed. The commandant, who for a moment had raised his head, bowed a second time with marks of the most profound respect. Then stretching his hand out, in his turn, towards the poop, that is to say, towards his own cabin, he drew back to allow Aramis to go first. The three Bretons, who had come on board after their bishop, looked at each other, stupefied. The crew were awed to silence. 5 minutes after, the commander called the second lieutenant, who returned immediately, ordering the head to be put towards Corona. Whilst this order was being executed, Aramis reappeared upon the deck and took a seat near the bastingage. Night had fallen. The moon had not yet risen, yet Aramis looked incessantly towards Belle Isle. Yves then approached the captain, who had returned to take his post in the stern, and said, in a low and humble voice, "What course are we to follow, captain?" "We take what course monseigneur pleases," replied the officer. Aramis passed the night leaning upon the bastingage. Yves, on approaching him next morning, remarked that the night must have been a very damp one, for the wood on which the bishop's head had rested was soaked with dew. Who knows? That dew was, it may be, the first tears that had ever fallen from the eyes of Aramis. What epitaph would have been worth that, good Porthos? End of chapter. Chapter 52 of The Man in the Iron Mask. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Man in the Iron Mask by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 52 Monsieur de Gesvres's Round. D'Artagnan was little used to resistance like that he had just experienced. He returned, profoundly irritated, to Nantes. Irritation, with this vigorous man, usually vented itself in impetuous attack, which few people hitherto, were they king, were they giants, had been able to resist. Trembling with rage, he went straight to the castle, and asked an audience with the king. It might be about 7 o'clock in the morning, and, since his arrival at Nantes, the king had been an early riser. But on arriving at the corridor with which we are acquainted, D'Artagnan found Monsieur de Gesvres, who stopped him politely, telling him not to speak too loud and disturb the king. "Is the king asleep?" said D'Artagnan. "Well, I will let him sleep. But about what o'clock do you suppose he will rise?" "Oh, in about 2 hours. His majesty has been up all night." D'Artagnan took his hat again, bowed to Monsieur de Gesvres, and returned to his own apartments. He came back at 9:30, and was told that the king was at breakfast. "That will just suit me," said D'Artagnan. "I will talk to the king while he is eating." Monsieur de Brienne reminded D'Artagnan that the king would not see any one at mealtime. "But," said D'Artagnan, looking askant at Brienne, "you do not know, perhaps, monsieur, that I have the privilege of entree anywhere, and at any hour." Brienne took the captain's hand kindly, and said, "Not at Nantes, dear Monsieur d'Artagnan. The king, in this journey, has changed everything." D'Artagnan, a little softened, asked about what o'clock the king would have finished his breakfast. "We don't know." "Eh? Don't know? What does that mean? You don't know how much time the king devotes to eating? It is generally an hour, and if we admit that the air of the Loire gives an additional appetite, we will extend it to an hour and a half. That is enough, I think. I will wait where I am." "Oh, dear Monsieur d'Artagnan, the order of the day is not to allow any person to remain in this corridor. I am on guard for that particular purpose." D'Artagnan felt his anger mounting to his brain a second time. He went out quickly, for fear of complicating the affair by a display of premature ill humor. As soon as he was out, he began to reflect. "The king," said he, "will not receive me, that is evident. The young man is angry. He is afraid, beforehand, of the words that I may speak to him. Yes, but in the meantime Belle Isle is besieged, and my two friends by now probably taken or killed. Poor Porthos! As to Master Aramis, he is always full of resources, and I am easy on his account. But no, no, Porthos is not yet an invalid, nor is Aramis in his dotage. The one with his arm, the other with his imagination, will find work for his majesty's soldiers. Who knows if these brave men may not get up for the edification of his most Christian majesty a bastion of Saint Gervais? I don't despair of it. They have cannon and a garrison. And yet, continued D'Artagnan, I don't know whether it would not be better to stop the combat. For myself alone, I would not put up with either surly looks or insults from the king, but for my friends I must put up with everything. Shall I go to Monsieur Colbert? Now, there is a man I must acquire the habit of terrifying. I will go to Monsieur Colbert. And D'Artagnan set forth bravely to find Monsieur Colbert, but was informed that he was working with the king at the castle of Nantes. "Good!" cried he. "The times have come again in which I measured my steps from de Treville to the cardinal, from the cardinal to the queen, from the queen to Louis XIII. Truly is it said that men, in growing old, become children again. To the castle, then." He returned thither. Monsieur de Lyonne was coming out. He gave D'Artagnan both hands, but told him that the king had been busy all the preceding evening and all night, and that orders had been given that no one should be admitted. "Not even the captain who takes the order?" cried D'Artagnan. "I think that is rather too strong." "Not even he," said Monsieur de Lyonne. "Since that is the case," replied D'Artagnan, wounded to the heart, "since the captain of the musketeers, who has always entered the king's chamber, is no longer allowed to enter it, his cabinet, or his salle à manger, either the king is dead, or his captain is in disgrace. Do me a favor, then, Monsieur de Lyonne, who are in favor, to return and tell the king plainly I send him my resignation." "D'Artagnan, beware of what you are doing." "For friendship's sake, go." And he pushed him gently towards the cabinet. "Well, I will go," said Lyonne. D'Artagnan waited, walking about the corridor in no enviable mood. Lyonne returned. "Well, what did the king say?" exclaimed D'Artagnan. "He simply answered, 'Tis well,'" replied Lyonne. "That it was well!" said the captain, with an explosion. "That is to say, that he accepts it? Good! Now, then, I am free. I am only a plain citizen, Monsieur de Lyonne. I have the pleasure of bidding you good bye. Farewell, castle, corridor, antechamber. A bourgeois, about to breathe at liberty, takes his farewell of you." And without waiting longer, the captain sprang from the terrace down the staircase where he had picked up the fragments of Gourville's letter. 5 minutes after, he was at the hostelry, where, according to the custom of all great officers who have lodgings at the castle, he had taken what was called his city chamber. But when he arrived there, instead of throwing off his sword and cloak, he took his pistols, put his money into a large leather purse, sent for his horses from the castle stables, and gave orders that would ensure their reaching Vannes during the night. Everything went on according to his wishes. At 8 o'clock in the evening, he was putting his foot in the stirrup, when M. de Gesvres appeared, at the head of 12 guards, in front of the hostelry. D'Artagnan saw all from the corner of his eye. He could not fail seeing 13 men and 13 horses. But he feigned not to observe anything, and was about to put his horse in motion. Gesvres rode up to him. "Monsieur d'Artagnan," said he aloud. "Ah, Monsieur de Gesvres, good evening." "One would say you were getting on horseback." "More than that, I am mounted, as you see." "It is fortunate I have met with you." "Were you looking for me, then?" "Mon Dieu, yes." "On the part of the king, I will wager?" "Yes." "As I 3 days ago went in search of Monsieur Fouquet." "Oh! Nonsense. It is no use being over delicate with me; that is all labor lost. tell me at once you are come to arrest me." "To arrest you? Good heavens, no." "Why do you come to accost me with 12 horsemen at your heels, then?" "I am making my round." "That isn't bad. And so you pick me up in your round, eh?" "I don't pick you up. I meet with you, and I beg you to come with me." "Where?" "To the king." "Good," said D'Artagnan, with a bantering air. "The king is disengaged." "For heaven's sake, captain," said M. de Gesvres, in a low voice to the musketeer, "do not compromise yourself; these men hear you." D'Artagnan laughed aloud, and replied, "March! People who are arrested are placed between the 6 first guards and the 6 last." "But as I am not arresting you," said M. de Gesvres, "you will march behind, with me, if you please." "Well," said D'Artagnan, "that is very polite, duke, and you are right in being so; for if ever I had had to make my rounds near your chambre de ville, I should have been courteous to you, I assure you, on the word of a gentleman. Now, one favor more. What does the king want with me?" "Oh, the king is furious." "Very well. The king, who has thought it worth while to be angry, may take the trouble to grow calm again, that is all. I shan't die of that, I will swear." "No, but " "But I shall be sent to keep company with unfortunate Monsieur Fouquet. Mordioux! That is a gallant man, a worthy man. We shall live very sociably together, I will be sworn." "Here we are at the place of destination," said the duke. "Captain, for heaven's sake, be calm with the king." "Ah! You are playing the brave man with me, duke," said D'Artagnan, throwing one of his defiant glances over Gesvres. "I have been told that you are ambitious of uniting your guards with my musketeers. This strikes me as a splendid opportunity." "I will take exceeding good care not to avail myself of it, captain." "And why not, pray?" "Oh, for many reasons. In the first place, for this: if I were to succeed you in the musketeers after having arrested you " "Ah! then you admit you have arrested me." "No, I don't." "Say met me, then. So you were saying if you were to succeed me after having arrested me " "Your musketeers, at the first exercise with ball cartridges, would fire my way by mistake." "Oh! as to that I won't say, for the fellows do love me a little." Gesvres made D'Artagnan pass in first, and took him straight to the cabinet where Louis was waiting for his captain of the musketeers, and placed himself behind his colleague in the antechamber. The king could be heard distinctly, speaking aloud to Colbert, in the same cabinet where Colbert might have heard, a few days before, the king speaking aloud with M. d'Artagnan. The guards remained as a mounted picket before the principal gate, and the report was quickly spread throughout the city that Monsieur le Capitaine of the musketeers had been arrested by order of the king. Then these men were seen to be in motion, and as in the good old days of Louis XIII. And M. de Treville, groups were formed and staircases were filled. Vague murmurs, issuing from the court below, came rolling to the upper stories, like the distant moaning of the waves. M. de Gesvres became uneasy. He looked at his guards, who, after being interrogated by the musketeers who had just got among their ranks, began to shun them with a manifestation of innocence. D'Artagnan was certainly less disturbed by all this than M. de Gesvres, the captain of the guards. As soon as he entered, he seated himself on the ledge of a window, whence with his eagle glance he saw all that was going on without the least emotion. No step of the progressive fermentation which had shown itself at the report of his arrest escaped him. He foresaw the very moment the explosion would take place, and we know that his previsions were in general correct. It would be very whimsical, thought he, if this evening my praetorians should make me king of France. How I should laugh! But at the height all was stopped. Guards, musketeers, officers, soldiers, Murmurs, uneasiness, dispersed, vanished, died away. There was an end of menace and sedition. One word had calmed the waves. The king had desired Brienne to say, "Hush, messieurs, you disturb the king." D'Artagnan sighed. "All is over," said he. "The musketeers of the present day are not those of his majesty Louis XIII. All is over." "Monsieur d'Artagnan, you are wanted in the antechamber of the king," proclaimed an usher. Chapter